back up. Okay, so we're about to start our Q&A for this WEAD presentation, Art and Education, part of their Art and Education series. Please direct your questions to Susan or Loraine, and you can also address them to Anne and Aviva and myself. Really, you can address them to anybody in the group. There's a lot of expertise in this room. I think the one thing that I would like to say that I neglected to say earlier is what perhaps would be obvious is the way in which these three artists in their practice work so closely yet in distinct ways with communities, within communities, to elevate knowledge and awareness of core issues. And these presentations were really very, very powerful. Please also feel free to direct your questions to Lynn. I just saw her camera come on, Lynn Elizabeth, our editor. So I'll turn it over to Susan now. And thank you again to WEAD and all the people who helped organize this and all of our presenters.
Amara, I'd just like to jump in terms of logistics. You can either raise your hand in the reactions down at the bottom, or you can also write in the chat. We'll keep an eye, and maybe some of us, all the co-hosts can kind of spot people who have their hands up. So Amara, you and Susan are the main ones, but if you miss them, we'll.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to see so many faces that I don't know, because this program has been building and building and building. Thanks to the WEAD committee that works diligently to put it together. And this book is, I think, an amazing contribution to a broader audience than just the environmental art audience. And so I don't know, Amara, if you and the editors are keeping tabs of like, who sends you information and how broad and wide your audience is. Have you any indication of like how wide, if you've got 300 books out there, where are they?
Lynn might be able to answer that. I'm sure there's some sort of record, but you're muted, Lynn, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but.
I wish I had a crystal ball so that I could look and see who exactly has them. By the way, that sales number was our distributor sales number. That doesn't include any of the direct sales channels that we have, like Ecoart Space and direct, orders that come directly to New Village Press. But yeah.
I just thought it would be interesting.
It really would
actually chart, where these pebbles in the stream are going, because I know we all do our work and we try to work with, local audiences, but that we never really know where, who are really influencing or who's using these skills. And I always find it interesting to find out, who your audience is. I mean, I know who you direct it towards, what audience you direct it towards, but I'm always very curious as to, I think it's much broader than the audience that you project it towards is what I'm trying to get at. But I'm
sure it is, because we've done presentations with different kinds of groups, right? So I think that is true. We certainly could look back at where the purchasers are who supported the fundraiser, but I think I think that's something we can look at in the future. Maybe there is some way to track that. But
Beverly has her hand up.
Oh, thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you,
and
Mary.
Thank you to the editors and everyone who's present, who's participated in this book. It's interesting to think about origins, not just where things are landing because I was just thinking about the Puyallup River, and I live on Puyallup land. Loraine has taught at UW-Tacoma. I hired her. I hired Vaughn to teach Ecoart back in the early aughts. And, you know, one thing that's not mentioned is that it is a very contaminated area. This is a very gritty city, and it's a very corrupt one. And one of the things that I get nervous about in relation to a lot of the beautiful eco art that we do is that it doesn't address some of the really sticky things, the political things underneath the surface. You know, often eco artists are asked to decorate and to highlight the beauty and to talk about the natural processes. And we need that because people are disconnected from the ecosystems that they live in. But it's crucial, and I think Lorraine's work points to this, to talk about the political issues that underlie the ecological crisis that we're living in right now. And many of the practices that are highlighted in the book are what I refer to as gentle actions, and we need them. But I want to argue for a sequel that gets into the more disobedient work, the work that is about direct action, that confronts petrocapitalism. It's much more difficult and uncomfortable to talk about that, but it is so crucial. Loraine, I was wondering if you might be willing to talk about maybe some of the projects that your students are doing in Middlesex now. Perhaps some of them are edgier and not as complacent with the powers that be. So thank you.
Well, first of all, lovely to see you, Beverly, and also that Tacoma connection, because thank you all that time ago for inviting me to go and teach there, because that was really such an important moment, and making that connection was very important for me. I think it is a very difficult problem about the celebratory bit of art, which is like celebrating the environment, and the part which is about making things happen, making things change. I think for me, the way, as I described at the beginning of my talk, the way I found to do it was to work with people who were already trying to make the change. It seems to me that usually if there's a problem, there are people on the ground who are being affected by it, are trying to make a difference, and don't always have the wherewithal to do anything about it. And I feel that art is a very powerful tool. And so that's what I see. I've taken in a way, the project with the geezers, the Active Energy Project, was probably less activist than some of my previous work. But what I've certainly felt is that you can lend the power of art to the work that other people are doing to support them. You can't do everything through art. You know, it has its limitations, but I think you can work collaboratively with those who are trying to make something happen. I think that's how I would see the issues that you describe.
I'm going to interject here and say Jackie Bruckner, who a lot of us know, and I were partners in Puyallup, invited by the National Park Service, and we worked with the local community. We went into the schools and we worked with the science teachers and the art teachers and took the students out to the creek headwaters that fed into the Puyallup River, where it was all channelized in concrete and was not a very pretty picture. but people had built houses, you know, right against the creek so that everything from their household, just like, you know, they made a beautiful backyard, but they fed it a lot of poisons and they washed their cars there. So they were really, in fact, poisoning their own creek. So the children did this project, which was amazing, that was called I Am the River. And they wrote and drew the pictures in the book about how to take care of me as the river. And it was, this booklet was just distributed throughout the whole community and went through several printings. I mean, it became a very popular booklet in the whole town. So it was a kind of, you know, I think it was an aggressive activity to bring in, other than just putting down, you know, a pretty sculpture someplace, that people got to think about, you know, their own relationship to the river. And Beverly's been working there forever to bring the political aspect into it. And and I've always appreciated Lorraine's work for many, many, many years, since she was in Mapping the Terrain, Suzanne Lacey's book, way back in, we published it in 1995, but we started working on it, like, I think in 1990. And her work has always been historically important. I really want to give you credit here, Loraine. Your work has been historically important to many of us in the eco art field and the political art field, and to social justice, because you were one of the first people, you know, to go into a more underserved, underprivileged community, and you know, when it was being gentrified. And I don't know if all of you know this work of Loraine, but I encourage you to research it, because, like, she's sort of this, in the United States, a more hidden gem. So Susan, you want to say something? Susan Hoenig?
Say something.
Say
Well,
something.
right. Well, I involve many different groups of people. And as I mentioned, I'm always happy to have people who have never stepped foot in a preserve before. I mean, it was advertised in the Franklin Times newspaper, all over the area, all different kinds of people. And to see, they're not just sculptures outlined with stone, pretty to look at, but on the leaf tours, I talk a lot about the understory of the forest. And I really became aware of this through my work, excuse me, as Amara mentioned, with the bird bander who I had worked with since 2006 in the Sauerland Mountains, a flyaway zone. A woman who is a head bander, a biologist, Hannah Southers. And I learned a lot about forest habitat and how birds are dependent on the health of a forest to survive. And so are humans. And so I, with my background in painting and sculpture, I started walking the trails and looking at the trees, and decided that outlining the stones, excuse me, the leaves with different types of stones would be a way for people to become more aware of what is going on in the different biomes of the forest. And whether it's the oldest tree, or being able to see through the understory, because so many saplings are just not there, or not growing because of deer, because of invasive species and so forth. So I point out, and I'm very fortunate, because the two caretakers of the Graber Woods Preserve are biologists. And so anytime, in fact, it was really a walkthrough, as I mentioned in the book, Emily Amen, who leads groups of children, she's a science teacher in the schools here, through and talks about the leaf sculptures. And so anytime I have a question about what identifying something or what is going on, I talk to them. And it's a way to learn and for me to experience and share with people. In 1989, this area of land was actually put aside for developing appreciation of nature. So that's the history is important in that way. So I do feel as though I am continuing this. And right now with climate change and so many great big storms, the forest is changing. There's so many trees that are falling. And so I've been working on other projects relating to that.
Do you want to tell us what some of the other projects are?
Yes, certainly. I'm working on a series of paintings called Uprooted Trees, Magic Cicadas, and Climate Change. In fact, I just had an exhibition with students who I engaged at Princeton High School with their work about cicadas, because it was the hot spot of cicadas every 17 years. And so I showed 10 paintings I did about cicadas. And with my research, the show was called Cicada Data. And the student work, in fact, on my Facebook, in one album, there's an album called Cicada Data. You can look it up if you wish. And then I did other paintings, which have not been shown yet, about trees that are fallen, such as white ash. I'm doing another leaf sculpture in a park nearby, Hobler Park, about the white ash tree. And the white ash tree around here is being decimated by the emerald ash borer. So I want to point that out and continue with creating a documentary about that. In fact, there is a documentary about the American chestnut leaf sculpture I did. It's on in the commission part of my website. And so you can watch the short documentary.
Thank you.
Okay.
Susan, Aviva has her hand up and we're hoping to hear from the editors.
Okay, go. Aviva. Where is she?
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
I see you.
Yes.
Thank you for all your presentations. I hate to single out somebody who's already been talked about a lot, but I do have a question for Loraine. I was really, really struck by how you described your interaction with the geezers as, I will go with you. That is such a statement of generosity and humility that honestly very few artists are capable of. But the other part that I heard in your presentation was how in your negotiations with the various community groups you worked with, you constantly built and expanded your view of what could be done. And I'm curious whether at this point in your career you have an idea for a next step or a next community that you'd like to work with and where that might take you.
Well, thank you for your question, Aviva. And it's nice to meet you because I've seen you so much in print that it's good to meet you in the virtual flesh anyway.
Likewise.
Well, the Active Energy Project actually finished 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago. And since then, what was interesting is that one of the, I mentioned that I piggybacked on this research project called the Hydro Citizenship for part of it. And one of the organizers, a social scientist, recognized through the project that what artists could do, never having thought the thought before, and was so impressed by not just me, but just by what art could do, is that he was working with environmental scientists in the Rajasthan desert about the issue of water conservation there, and the fact that a generation of knowledge had been lost, and the environmental scientists were finding it incredibly difficult to reintroduce the knowledge, and were at a loss. And Michael went along and said, "Oh yeah, we can get an artist to do that." And so he invited me to be part of a research project. Of course, I said, I can't work in the Rajasthan desert. I know nothing about it or the people, but what I can do is find some artists who can. And we did a project with a fantastic traditional puppeteer and a traditional storyteller who both work with the children to work with their grandparents to find out the knowledge, and then to translate that into shadow puppets that went around the villages, and to a scroll and a mural that was used as information. So that's one thing, and that's been and gone now, that project. But out of that, the same team. So I'm now in a university, and I most of my previous projects I ran through small arts organisations that I ran, C-Space, but when I joined a university, I noticed that there was research funding to be had, and perhaps I could do things on a slightly larger scale and take the knowledge I had in a slightly different way, perhaps in a more advisory way. But out of that project in Rajasthan, there was another project with the same team, and the puppeteer again, in Kashmir, working with the children who had experienced the conflict in Kashmir, and using the arts and a local arts therapist to enable the children to work through some of their experiences, so they weren't held back by the terrible things they had been through and witnessed, which we're now looking for some follow-on funding to take it to other places. So a lot of things that I'm doing now are about passing on what I've learned, I think, rather than doing a lot more projects. I'm very keen to do another MA in social practice. I did do one for a few years at Middlesex. And Beverly asked me the question about my students. And I have to say that there's two here. I think Isabel is who I think she is, but Wendy Charlton, who you can see there in the picture of a woolly hat. Wendy did the most fantastic project in North London, in Tottenham, on an estate called Broadwater Farm that was absolutely vilified in the press for being the most violent place you could ever go. And she worked with the community there to put on an event with spoken word artists that celebrated that estate. And so that, I'm really, when students do projects like that, I feel that I've done something worthwhile. And Isabel, if it's Isabel Reddington, who I think it is, she did a project with a colleague and it was just at the beginning of lockdown. She was working with a youth offending team, but had to translate it into something that was online, and they developed an online website called Care Weaving to enable people who had difficulties to come and find all the resources they needed in one place. So I am really, yes, Isabel says it's her, yes, hello. So
I wonder, I'm going to interrupt you, Loraine. I wonder if your students would say a word, because, this is like, as many of us are getting older, I am always interested in like how younger generations, which they can still be old people to be younger than me, but how they might use something like this book, and like, what if they aren't going to university? Like, this book is one way for them to get the information that they might need for their own work. And that's what I think is, why the books are, and I just think there's a wealth of books coming out this year. Aviva's got one, and Betsy Damon, and I don't know, everybody's got a book coming out. So Anne Rosenthal, I'm going to put you on the spot, and could you talk about how hard it was to organize a group of independent, strong-minded people? Really, everyone, I mean, that's the thing about working with us all, is that, and WEAD too, the WEAD board, we come together to work together with such good intentions, but all of us are really independent, and we collaborate communities, but can we collaborate with each other? That is a really big question. So Anne, go ahead, tell us your story.
Yeah, you are putting me on the spot here. I have to give a lot of credit to Amara on that one, because Amara seems to have amazing patience, and and is an amazing diplomat and a great listener. And I think Amara did a whole lot to kind of make sure in our editorial group that everyone was heard, that all the ideas, were put on the table, that they were discussed, the way they needed to be, and that consensus was reached. And hopefully, I know there were some disagreements that kind of never got resolved, but at least people were willing to let go and say, okay, this is the majority opinion. And even though I might not agree with it, I'll go with it. But yes, it was definitely challenging. It was very challenging.
How many years did you work on this?
4.
Well, we started getting organized in 2016. So maybe it's,
5.
yeah.
Is there a volume 2 coming?
Not that I plan on editing. Not on my radar at this point.
Yeah.
Although Beverly's suggestion is kind of an intriguing one. But yeah, I think a pause is in order for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the other big challenge, along with working, our editorial team working together, was the material that we got initially just, was so diverse, not only in terms of the content, but in the way that content was presented. And a big part of why it took so long to pull it together was that we had to come up with some kind of, overarching structure to put the content into, to have it make sense for people and be useful. And of course, artists don't like structure, especially when it's imposed by somebody else. So that was often a big challenge too. But we, and there was a lot of going back and forth between the various editors and the writers, giving editorial feedback, getting, multiple drafts. I would say on average, low, was like 5. 5 is a low ball number for the number of drafts that went back and forth with 67 writers. So, you can do the math on that.
So how do your writers feel about the book?
Feedback I've gotten has been quite good.
Yeah.
From folks who are represented in the book, and also from people who are purchasing the book, have purchased it, intended to purchase it. I mean, in a way, there's at this stage in 2022, I'm not sure there's anything earth-shattering in this book, but it is another way of framing and bringing the content and these ideas forward. And as I listened to Lorraine's presentation and to some of the exchange, Susan, between you and Loraine, I couldn't help but think of Suzanne Lacey's notion of the importance of generational transfer, which I've talked about a lot in my presentation last month. And I think that it is one of, it is a hugely important strategy, and certainly very appropriate for this series, the WEAD Art and Education series, for us to be thinking through.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Because there's so much knowledge that's going to be lost. It doesn't mean that, younger generations won't find their own way of working. That'll be different, but there's some things about, it's like trite to say, but you don't want everyone having to reinvent the wheel all over again. And there's so much to learn from each other.
Right.
That's what I've always loved about, this discipline of work is that, you know, so many artists like, you know, like, whoops, excuse me, I'm sorry. I don't know if I can even turn this off.
There you
I'm embarrassed by that. I'm sorry. Anyways, I think that more books need to be written, and I'm glad that they're all being written. And thank you so much for putting in the time, because we know you succeeded where a few of us other ones failed in trying to get the group together to do something. So it's like, you all should not have bouquets of cut flowers, but you should be sent a lot of seeds to, and thanks for what you have done. And because that is what you're doing, is sowing a lot of seeds out there.
Well, that's what we say at one point in our introduction. You know, now it's time to scatter the seeds, and and see what comes of it. You know, we're seeking more reviews. We have had, I think, maybe 3 reviews in magazines, and we'll just kind of keep chipping away at
We'll
it.
put a review of the book for sure in the next issue of WEAD's online magazine, which is another way, you know, that we try to spread this information, this valuable information. But I
So
know
this
I was around. Go ahead, Mary.
Just saying, this is a perfect time for us to maybe finish up, and then we can continue with the dialogue afterwards, after we stop the recording. But I think we just need to give a huge round of applause and thank yous to everybody. Mara for organizing, Aviva, Susan Hoenig, Loraine, Susan Steinman, and Rosenthal, and all of you who came, Lynn, Elizabeth, everybody who came. And thank you very much on behalf of WEAD Art and Education. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll stop the recording now, and then we can continue with who